Thank you. Thanks, Dave, for that nice introduction. My name's Joey. I work at Playdom, also known, well, now we're part of Disney Interactive as of 2 years ago, so you might know us under that name. I'm a producer, not a game designer, so keep that in mind as I'll be talking about metrics and different things like that throughout today. And I started out as a community manager at Playdom, so I've seen this content from both sides. So Playdom, we've been around since 2008. Started out on MySpace. Some of our original games were RPG styles, Mobsters, Sortie Life, and then our more recent games that are probably more well-known, City of Wonder, Guards of Time, Marvel Avengers Alliance is a recent success we've had. We've won a couple awards recently for creative game design and so on and so forth. And Dave was a former colleague there. So today we're going to be talking about Sortie Life specifically. It's a little bit of a case study. I worked on that game for nearly 3 years. So we'll talk about just what the game is quickly, what the community looks like quickly, and go through a couple of examples when we listened and it worked. When we listened to the community, it didn't necessarily work. And some other things that we tried to leverage from the game community as we're constantly designing and developing for a live game. So Sortie Life, almost 4 years old, launched on MySpace originally and quickly ported to Facebook and a bunch of other networks. It peaked at 1.2 million DAUs early in 2010. It's a lot smaller now, but it's still doing well, it's basically boiled down to the most active users at this point, so there's still a lot going on there. And it's an RPG-style game. If you're familiar with Mafia Wars or the Playdom Mobsters franchises, they actually share a lot of similar mechanics. Of course, ours is focused on fashion and collecting things and completing mini-games and so on and so forth. But there still is the fighting component. Rather than fighting with guns and vehicles, you're fighting with clothes and pets and handbags. So I know a lot more about women's shoes than I ever thought I would at this point in my life, but that's where you get to. So just a couple screenshots of the game. Classic collection mechanics, lots of things around that. There's standard RPG things where you can add points as you level up to energy or stamina, various fighting statistics. We focused a lot on fashion. Converted the game originally from, it was much more focused on sort of the mob-style fighting, and we over time converted it to very fashion and collector's based, but we kept a lot of those fighters around too, because I like both sides. And our artists are fantastic. They've done a really good job over time. Quick shot of the fighting page. Of course, fights are dependent on how many friends you have, and that's going to create a lot of social connections. All right, so what the community looks like. When I'm talking about community feedback, most of that, in this specific instance, is coming from the Sortie Life forum. We had a really strong forum presence, one of the most active of any of the Playdom games until maybe now eclipsed by the Marvel game. And so that's when I say community, I usually mean the forum users. But there's also other aspects we have in terms of fan pages. We had a blog for a while. Of course, you get complaints via sport tickets, and we do sort of informal email surveys every so often. As well as Sortie Life spawned a lot of outside of the game fan pages, sort of user-generated, where they created their own communities, shared different things that they thought about the game or different ways of playing, as well as lots of cheats and hacks, as they are wont to do. And we had an in-game messaging system where users could sort of broadcast Twitter-style to all of their friends, or they could one-on-one chat with each other, not real-time necessarily. And I think the community benefited a lot from that in-game social interaction, sort of the live feed of what everyone in the game is doing, because people would hear about something there, it would be sort of confusing to follow. They could immediately go to the forum or the blog and discuss it with people that they knew already. And a couple quick side notes on why I thought this community was particularly strong. We stumbled into some great player moderators for our forums, and they just sort of took it and ran with it, and we just provided them the platform. And there are people who really loved this game, and so they spend a lot of time talking about it and giving us feedback on it and telling other users sort of what they found fun and engaging about it. Second, our community managers did a really good job working on just informing the players rather than trying to constantly market them or upsell them on different things or telling them why they should be playing the game a specific way. It was just sort of a platform, and we let them go, and the focus was just let the users know what's going on, keep them updated. And then, of course, like I said before, this crossover from the in-game social channels to these off-game interactions. All right, so a couple case studies, or examples, I guess, not really case studies. Shortly after our game peaked, we had a lot of sort of conflicting, confusing feedback around the types of new content we were adding to the game. Some of the high-level players were like, you launched this new stuff, I'm done with it right away, I'm bored. We had people who were mid-level players, and we launched new stuff, and they're like, I can't even get there because I've targeted my character to do something else. The constant complaint, as soon as you have a social game, people are going to say, there's too much stuff I have to buy with real money, why can't I have everything for free? And then, the complaints that just we're adding new content, it feels sort of like the same stuff. And so these are pretty constant complaints that we had throughout, but we decided to listen to them particularly at this point in time because it matched up with a lot of the data we're seeing. As a producer, I'm constantly, evaluating how the game's performing. And the key metrics for our later content releases were just not what we expected. They weren't as good as we expected. And the data specifically backed that up by saying, look, you're launching content and it's only hitting a very small portion of your players, and so the ROI on that content is a lot less because you put the same amount of work and only a few players can benefit from it. And so we were trying to think about how to take all of this and turn it into a usable feature. So we created a feature called Study Abroad Locations. And essentially, as a player, you're a college girl. You get to go study abroad in the fashion capitals of the world, and we provide a whole bunch of content for the players around this. Fashion as well as just a sort of storyline, and it was a completable set of content you could do. And the trick here was, rather than having it be only for high-level players, we reset basically everything, because you're in a new country, your American cash doesn't work anymore, and your American stats don't work anymore. So people were essentially reset and had a whole new game experience here. And the progress was really dependent on social connections, because we had a lot of strong social connections in the game. We want to leverage that, and of course, we want to encourage virality through social connections. So this type of feature was really successful across the board. It's happened in lots of other similar games, especially these RPG-style games. But a couple of reasons that I think this specific instance worked well. One, the community and the metrics agreed on a problem. So people were telling us there's a problem with this content, and our data was saying there's a problem with this content. Two, this problem had a clear benefit if we solve it, because we're putting a lot of effort into what we're building, and we want people to enjoy it, we want people to access it, we want people to purchase it when it comes down to it. And an important side note is that the players didn't necessarily provide the solution for this. They said, hey, here's what we're seeing, and they didn't tell us, hey, we want to go study abroad, we want to go study in Paris and Milan and Tokyo. They said, hey, we don't see this, and we love this game, and we're not getting what we want out of it. And so we, as our design team, had to come up with this feature and balance it and make it effective. But the players just provided a better understanding of what was going on. All right, so now a similar case, except it didn't turn out the way we'd hoped. Again, a large trend. This was a few months after we'd started doing locations. And this time it was about the social play. And people, again, really common complaints you'll see in social games. I don't have enough friends who are willing to come play. Why do I need so many people? In our game, it's a sorority house rather than neighbors or an ally, but why do I need so many? But then people also really positive feedback about, I really love the social connections I have in this game. I like being able to chat. I like being able to see what other people are accomplishing. Anytime we did a Facebook fan page post, 90% of the comments would be, add me as a friend, I'll send you stuff, I'll send you free stuff. And so, again, why did we listen? Well, in this case, we thought it was data again. Players with more friends in the game tend to stick around longer. I don't think that's a huge secret. If you have more people to interact with and even more people bringing you back to the game, it's likely. So we decided to make a feature out of this. And this is actually, I still think it's a good feature, even though we'll find out that it didn't work. Where sort of low-level new players who came into the game could connect with a high-level player who wasn't their Facebook friend. And both of them get special rewards helping each other out. The high-level player, as a low-level player advances, gets more rewards, and the low-level player gets to learn about the game, find out all about the secrets of the sorority life. And so what do the results look like? Well, the user feedback was extremely positive. The high-level players really liked it. They liked being able to add new friends, they liked getting rewards. And we had run this as an A/B test. Some players did not get this feature. And there was a ton of complaints from people saying, hey, why don't I get this feature? I really want this feature. If all of my friends have it, I want to be able to do this, which implies that it would be a good feature. But then we got the data back, and it was sort of flat, a lot of noise. No change here really means just it's all within the noise. It wasn't statistically significant. We saw a small increase in time on site, but when you couldn't couple that with any things we really care about in terms of retention or revenue, it ended up being not a feature we considered successful. And so I wanted to talk about why that is for this feature specifically and just a little broader. One, your community is a really small percent of your users. We had what I consider one of the best communities that played them, and it's still maybe 1% of our DAUs at any given point in time actively engaging. Two, that because it's small, it's going to be dominated by a few loud voices. So same community moderators who are wonderful also tend to sort of guide the discussion in particular ways that they want to see. Three, and this is the one that we'll probably revisit, I'll revisit again in a second, but almost everyone in your community, not always, but a large majority of the people in your community are more invested in the game already than your average player. These are people who cared enough about the game to go seek out a forum, to go seek out a fan page, to go send you an email. So their feedback is not going to be necessarily the sort of median of the normal game, the entire game community. And then again, it's not representative. People can be scared away by forums. People don't go read blogs. They don't like clicking on links that take them outside of Facebook, etc. So for this particular feature, the big sis, little sis feature, we didn't have, it's this point number 3 that's really the kicker. We didn't have feedback from the new users who were engaging with this feature because they weren't on the forums yet. They had just joined the game. And we didn't really get any sort of insight into what they wanted from this feature and what they were benefiting from there. And so the feature ended up not, most of our success metrics for the feature were focused around new users because the high-level players engaging are already heavily engaged. An important thing to keep in mind, of course, going along with that point is, on average, people who are in at least in our case, who are in our forums were more likely to be a payer than your average player because they're, again, really engaged people, really love this game. So you can't just throw everything out that they say because they are, a target segment of your audience, but they're not your entire audience. Cool. And so moving on to, another thing before we move on, sorry. This surprised me when I actually went back and looked at some of this data, but it's a constant reminder, like, players are not necessarily good at telling you what they want. They're often good at telling you what they don't want, but they're not very good at necessarily telling you what they want. So here's a sort of a averaged out list of the users' favorite fashions from our different locations. And then we compare that to actually how the items sold. There's not a lot of, there's small amounts of correlation, but it doesn't really predict anything. And we saw this over and over again. Users would talk about the items released this week or talk about the fashions that are in the game, and they were not good at predicting what would do well. They were often good at telling us what was bad. But we sort of had to pull out that data in other ways because the users, again, it's sort of dominated by a few small voices or different things like that. So just keep that in mind. All right, so a few other interesting applications of player communities. Emergent gameplay, I think, is one of the most interesting ones. Sortie Life is a pretty deep game. It was started out as a fighting game. We sort of moved it towards collection and fashion over time, but we kept all the fighting mechanics in there. So we had this little residual feature called slapping, where if you lost to someone in a fight, you could use a small bit of your stamina and go slap them where they couldn't retaliate against this. Really minor, really not essential to the game, but this created giant drama within the game. Huge player factions where people just said, I can't have anyone out of my 500 friends. You can never use the slap button. I will kick you out of my house. If you have any friends, I will just attack you incessantly and get all of my 500 friends to attack you as well. And they would create off-site groups to sort of call people out on this, and there was just giant, like, they changed all of their character names to say, we're of a type of player that doesn't play like this. And this is a really minor feature in the game. And this is something that, if I was looking at the metrics for the game, I wouldn't necessarily be able to pull this out. Like, maybe I could see this feature was seeing spikes or different things like that. But it wasn't really something that was apparent until we had this strong community. And actually, we turned out, we made a feature to follow up on this, where you could steal your sweetheart of the many boyfriends you had. You just had to select one as your sweetheart at any given point in time. So we created a feature where you could steal this back and forth. And this feature was moderately successful within the community. Some people didn't like it, again, probably for similar reasons, but it actually improved some of the key metrics that we were looking for. So pretty pleased with that. Other types of emergent gameplay, I've got my little bounty hunter Sortie Life avatar up there, you can see. And just our players created all these complex guides of different ways they could play. One thing I think was really successful for our game, we had the ability to create up to 10 different characters on the same Facebook account, and we sort of restricted how often you could switch back and forth and how many bonuses you could collect for each, etc. But so users would churn through all of our content on their main character and sort of unlock everything, and then they would go back and create a new one because they just wanted to keep playing and try out these different styles of play. So the community was a huge benefit for other players who wanted to retry stuff, try a different, a burn list rider. What does that mean? Let's go find out. And just something we had to constantly keep in mind as we're trying to design for this game is we need to be able to support these. The players who are doing this, we can get 10 times the gameplay out of a single player if they're going to go back and do this over and over again. So we got to make sure that any new features are going to support this, even if it seems kind of minor. And the only way to understand that is to look at what the users are saying in the community and these off Facebook fan sites. And two, really make sure your social channels allow for this sharing of this. Players would want to both compare their stats and then say, hey, this is how I got better stats than you. It was really fascinating sort of competition between sort of fashioning interaction between competition and helping each other out, which maybe that's the definition of a sorority. But still, the social channels we had in the game really enabled people to share and compare these. So one last thing, switching away from fighting instead to fashion. There was a clear fashion obsession. We had, the users would set up their own costume contests. They would all constantly be talking about, oh, what about this new thing, or maybe we should have this new thing in the game, in this new style. I want this designer. You can see up here, these are some of the entries from the weekly Fugly Friday competition. They got a lot of creative people in our game. And so people were creating different ways to interact around clothing and fashion that we weren't providing in the game. So we added, we actually ran an official contest where users could submit a design. They could draw it or design it in Photoshop, et cetera, and send it in to us, and if it got submitted to the game, they could win hard currency. And the winners in this case were voted on by the community. We selected a few of them, they got to vote on them, the community did. And this actually increased our engagement in the community by a massive amount. So on average, we're seeing maybe 1% to 2% of users sort of contacting us or through the forums or through different channels in a given week. And when we run one of these contests, up to 20% of people would at least visit the site and look at a few of, this is outside of the game, look at a few of the submissions and so on and so forth. And initially I was like, well, this is just sort of a lot of big marketing ploy, but when we looked at it, these items that users created were among our top selling items of all time. And this is a few of them, some Halloween costumes and a couple other things here that users created. And it turned out that, they wanted to support their fellow user as well as just like these items got a ton of publicity and so they're more likely to be purchased. So just as a sort of a summary, I talked a little bit about sort of community versus, the key metrics that we're talking about the whole time. And this is overly simplistic, but essentially the way I look at it is we have to measure success according to the key metrics. They're either called success metrics, right? And so you can't just use the community to say, oh wow, these players loved it, it must be successful. But at the same time, the community is really going to be able to help you tell why, or especially why not. Why something didn't perform the way you expected. Of course, remembering all these different caveats. Okay, so what I just said, don't use community to evaluate the success of a feature, but also don't use sort of feedback from the community to pick future features unless you have some metrics to back it up. And then going back to the big sis, little sis feature, you're not going to get a lot of community feedback around the early game. So you need to have an alternate form of getting more data around that. Definitely hard data, sort of tracking your user funnel and stuff, but maybe user testing or sort of surveys of early game players that are targeted with a special reward, so on and so forth, because your normal community is not necessarily going to see much of that. On the winning side, definitely use your community to discover emergent gameplay. Make sure you maintain those. Provide social channels so it can spread to everyone in the game. Provide social channels so it can spread to everyone in the game. And then again, use the player feedback to establish why something succeeded or especially why it failed. And a few particular things we noticed: usability, availability problems. People can also call out, oh, I just couldn't find this button, or I didn't see that in the game, or I'm 3 days late because I didn't see it. Isolating bugs. And then just specific motivations or blockages on a given feature or a given type of content within the game. One last little bonus bit. We had a mascot for our Tokyo location to sort of guide you through the game and give you little tips as you went along. It's a roll cake, little green guy here. And the users, for some reason, loved this and took off with it, so they decided to create their own. And so we had over like 400 of these just created on the forum for no apparent reason, and lots of little references. Got a Captain Jack Sparrow and a couple KISS band members and stuff. Anyway, so that's our community in a nutshell. So thanks very much. Any questions?
Realizing you're not a game designer, I've talked to a lot of friends that are game designers, and they say there's this flow that they have of this great idea, but because metrics aren't backing it up, no one else will touch it on the table. How has this process helped reconcile that issue of not having the metrics that back up a possibly great idea?
Yeah, that's a good question. The question was basically, as a designer, if you have a great idea but you don't have the metrics to back it up, is there a way that this sort of community process I've been talking about can help you understand that? There's a couple things. One is especially like looking deeply into what community is playing and saying, hey, maybe I didn't think about cutting the data this way. I didn't look at whether they were using that slapping feature or various things, and that can then support new features that you, by saying, oh, I've got just so much data and I can filter it all these different ways. The community tells me to filter it in a specific way that then can sort of guide the discussion towards, I think for these specific reasons, this feature is good. And then, so I mean, that's the main one. Of course, it's constantly going to be a battle saying, well, we need to have some positive proof, but every once in a while you got to try something new, and I think you can use community to argue for that as well, just saying, they're constantly saying we have nothing new and everything we have is stolen from somewhere else, et cetera, et cetera. So, using the community to argue to say, let's at least try something new and get a lot of feedback on it, But again, it's going to be a battle. I'm usually on the other side of the battle, the metric side of the battle, so I'm not going to provide a great answer, but I think the best answer is saying, use your community to learn how to cut your data in interesting ways and see if that supports your predictions in that way. So. Yeah, questions about what type of forum we use and how much support we do on the Facebook wall. It's become, since Playdom has a lot of games, we sort of centralized the forums and sort of created, here's the Playdom.com experience, and you can both in the same place send some support tickets or go look at those forums, different things like that. So that's been helpful to have, a critical mass of people, games to work with there. Actually, the original Sortie Life forum was sort of its own site and just kind of hung out, and I actually think that contributed to its success because it was its own place where people were pretty free. Yeah, I'm not a forum expert. I wasn't there when they set up. I just sort of helped manage them for a little while. I do think that allowing people a place to express themselves and really own control of that will go a lot better than sort of being tight finger controlled. So, using a standard forum interface, of course, will helpful. You should have a few people who are familiar with how to edit it and update it and so on and so forth. As far as fan pages go, there's different theories on that. We tend to do a lot of promotional stuff there, just announcements saying, hey, there's this new feature. Hey, check out this. You can get different types of engagement if you include polls or different videos versus pictures, but that's just something you have to test out for your audience and see how they're willing to interact with the different types of things. But that's something that is going to come a lot better from testing it within a specific game because your audience is slightly different. There are, of course, optimized things around the Facebook newsfeed in which things will show up more that I'm not an expert on either, so there's probably a talk on that somewhere. So, one more question.
I find myself lurking in many social game communities, and I often see players suggest game mechanics to designers, and some of them are pretty cool suggestions. Sometimes players come up with these elaborate ideas for how to make a game better. Have you ever used any player suggestions as actual game systems?
The question was, we often see really good design or feature ideas in the community. Have we ever actually used one of those? I don't think we ever took one fully fleshed. Obviously, there's a lot of balance that has to go into it, but we definitely took a couple ideas, especially around the people who really love the fighting mechanic, and said, this is something I'd like to try. Maybe we could do this. Maybe we can do this around sort of just taking the same basic mechanic of the stats-based fighting, and you got to collect all these things and cutting up in different ways. And so people definitely suggested things that we at least incorporated into future features. But unless you have a game designer lurking on your forums, it's likely that they won't think of all the different aspects of a feature that you need to do. So you're going to take parts of it, and you're going to take, it's going to provide a lot of fodder for interesting ideas. But rarely did you see a sort of a fully fleshed feature that we actually ended up implementing. So, cool. Thanks.